Today, I'm going to go over how I generated over 10,000 leads for my marketing agency. And when you get to the end of this, you're going to understand a book of business in the multi-millions of dollars. So I'm going to go through every single strategy that I use to get clients so you can choose the ones that work best for you. So I'm going to jump into a presentation and explain to you how I did all of that. So the first question is, what should I use? How should I go about getting all of these clients? And the first thing to understand is to become a real agency, you need to use multiple ways of getting clients. You cannot just use one way and think that that's going to be it, and you can just use some magical paid ad and one ad is going to make you into a real business. That doesn't happen. To become a real agency, to become something of size, something that you can sell, you are going to need to use more than one method of getting business. And the other thing is, contrary to what you probably hear of the folks who are pitching you constantly over the DMs, you cannot cold DM your way into a real business. One way or another, if you are just relying on cold DMing clients, there's a couple of things that you're going to find out. Number one, the larger clients, the ones that are actually going to take your business to the next level, are not going to be responding that way, at least not in the numbers that you can pump out on cold DMs. The other thing that you're going to find out is that you're going to get trapped in that cold DM cycle where it's really hard to scale that. If it's something you're thinking, oh, I'll do it myself for a while, then I'll hire someone to do it. You might see some businesses getting to the $500,000 mark, maybe the $1 million mark doing that, but virtually all of the agencies that I know who have gotten anywhere have not used that as a primary strategy. So I know there's a lot of noise about that, but don't think that you're going to cold DM your way in there. In fact, that's not even the way that I'd suggest starting. So if someone is selling you any kind of one size fits all marketing for your agency, it's BS, because there isn't a one size fits all. So we have to dispense with the idea that there is some kind of perfect magic bullet. And if you just do this one thing, then you are going to succeed getting your agency to where you want to go. It's not going to happen. There are three kinds of leads, and I'm going to go over each kind of lead, and for each one of them, the best way of getting those leads. So the first is organic. We all know about organic leads. You're publishing on a blog, you're writing some thought leadership articles out there, maybe you're putting something on LinkedIn, so the organic is number one. Second are paid leads. And for a lot of newer agencies, it's very compelling to go to paid. And I did this with my agency. I started out with paid because it is the fastest path to revenue other than picking up the phone and calling folks. But paid is very, very fast, but of course it can be very, very expensive. And the last is outbound. That is going out to people and pitching them your services, whether that is much maligned, because I maligned it, cold DM strategy, or any kind of referral marketing and actually talking to people in the real world. That's outbound. So those are the three categories that I'm going to talk about today. So first we'll start out with organic leads. What are the ways in which I generated organic leads to get that book of business? So the first is I used YouTube. So I created YouTube videos and I filmed one a week over the course of about a year and a half until we had a stable of those videos. So that provided some lead generation organically, but very importantly, it was validation, because when somebody was looking us up, they would see my videos and they would consume a whole bunch of them. And then they would be familiar with me before we even got on the pitch. And that was a real assistance to getting over the line in the pitch, because they were already familiar. It wasn't completely cold. I was somebody because I was on the internet, and like it or not, you have to be on the internet to be real to a prospect. Otherwise, how are you going to stand out? So YouTube videos once a week helped until we had about 50 or so of them. We were also blogging once a week and republishing those as LinkedIn articles. So the blogging itself for us did not get a lot of organic traffic on the blog, but the act of writing and then republishing it in multiple places did. It got seen a lot more on LinkedIn. So we did have the blog and we drove some social traffic to the blog, but also using those articles in multiple places. The third was a podcast. And what we typically would do is repurpose the other things we were doing into the podcast. So we'd take audio clips out of the YouTube videos, or I would go over some of the articles and just read them and record pieces of those, and those became podcasts. And that was yet another thing that people got familiar with. And I wouldn't say that podcasts were something that was a real lead generator again. It was more a validation that someone, when they were investigating who we were, could go down the rabbit hole and get familiar with us in another medium. Because even if the content is the same, the medium is different. People prefer to consume it in an audio format versus video. And lastly, LinkedIn and Facebook posting. Medium length posts about 3 times a week. Sometimes these were slightly repurposed things from the other content. Sometimes it was unique content for those, but those were posted multiple times a week. I know some people say, Facebook, really? But yes, audience. You have to be wherever the audience is going to be. So again, even if you don't think that you're going to generate a lead, you might be validated when somebody searches for you, even on Google, and your Facebook page comes up and they're going to click through and they're going to see, oh, this is a real business. This isn't just some dude cold DMing people. We also did a newsletter once per week, and we were very intentional about testing subject lines of that newsletter to get the highest open rate that we could. We called it Alchemy Insider because the agency was called Practice Alchemy, and we found that after testing a whole bunch of different titles for it, that one performed the best. So we went with the newsletter for once a week. What that did was drive people back to the blog and back to YouTube. So we had something we owned. We had an owned asset, which was that newsletter list of thousands of people who had expressed interest over the years. And this was another way in which we could extend our paid media. So as you'll see when I get to the paid media section, a lot of the things we were doing would generate a lead, but wouldn't necessarily close right away. But they get stuck on the email list, and guess what? 2, maybe even 3 years later, they'd come back and we'd get a 6-figure engagement off of somebody who was just on the newsletter being nurtured and seeing all of this stuff again and again and again. We also did a webinar about once per quarter, and that was on some topic that was interesting to the audience. So my agency worked with law firms, so we would do things specifically tailored for their niche and what's going on. So things that they cared about in that season and in their particular market is what we would do webinars on about once per quarter. The attendance on those things would be anywhere between 25 and 75 people. So it's not huge, but let's remember that for us, when we're thinking about an annual 6-figure engagement, it doesn't take that many people crossing the line to be absolutely worth it. We also developed about 15 lead magnet assets. We probably developed more over time, but only ended up using about 15, and we rotated them throughout the year. So on a given month, we might be promoting a certain lead magnet, and then on a separate month, a different one. So they rotate through the year. And when you have a stable of them, if you have 12, you can rotate one per month across the scope of a year, and it always feels fresh because a year later, no one's going to remember what you did. So if you just have those in rotation, you only have to develop them once, and provided that they're good and you haven't tested a few others that do better than those, you can rotate through them on an ongoing basis. So that proved to be a very effective way of doing it. You put in the work for the first year, you set those up, you set up all the email flows, everyone goes onto the email list, and then you can just rotate. And January is always this topic, February is always this topic, and you know that reliably you're going to have something going out, and you're not always scrambling to do this for years. So you're putting in that upfront work, but this is going to be something that's going to be evergreen for your marketing. We also did a bunch of LinkedIn and Facebook publishing, quote cards, video snippets, audiograms, all of those things, just to round it out. We always wanted the social profiles to look like they're busy. We don't want it to look like a graveyard, because very often happens is that you get ambitious and you'll start this flurry of activity, and then you'll start posting, and then you'll stop. And then somebody comes there and sees that the last time you posted was 3 years ago, and they're asking themselves, well, is this business real? And even though you and I know that has nothing to do with the quality of your work, that's not how it's perceived. So think about how it's perceived, and that your socials, if they are empty, if they are not being published to regularly, your clients or prospective clients mostly are going to think, is there anything here? So that's organic. Let's jump to the ways in which I generated paid leads. The first was Google search ads. Now, because I was a pretty niche down agency, we didn't have a ton of traffic to this. And that's borne out with multiple agencies that I've talked with and I've worked with, that by and large, you can get ROI positive traffic from Google search. But if you are a niche down agency, or if you're dealing with pretty high-end clients, this is not going to be something you can throw a ton of money at. There just isn't that much search volume. So perhaps if you're going for clients that are more SMBs, local businesses, you'll be able to get a lot more from this. But the further you go up the pyramid in how big your engagements are, the harder it is going to be to get any real number of them from paid media. And it gets pretty expensive. So that's another thing that you have to consider. Next was LinkedIn ads. For us, this was by far the best paid channel. So with LinkedIn ads, we were able to get a really good ROI and pretty much max it out, because we could target specifically people in our niche and the decision makers there. What we would often do is target with a lead magnet, and then the lead magnet download, so PDF, what have you, download, would then on the next page offer them a strategy session. But even if they didn't take that up, we would go outbound to them and call, because we knew who they were because they requested it. If you're working with any kind of registered professional, you can get all of their contact information. So if you're working in medical, if you're working in dental, if you're working in legal, if you're working with accountants, anyone that's a registered professional, based on their email that they give you, even if they give you a throwaway email, you can look them up based on their name. So sometimes we would get some wacky Yahoo email address, but we could tell from the IP address that it came from such and such a state, and this was probably the first name and last name. So we would have some virtual assistants in the Philippines actually look look up and find who that person probably was. And we actually generated a bunch of leads from people using their personal/throwaway email addresses. We reverse looked them up and had a sales rep call them. And we generated a bunch of leads from that because we were able to tell the actual person, and based on the IP address and the location, where they were. And those people had intent. So, they kind of sort of were trying to disguise who they were. But the fact is, we now knew that they were in the market for this. So there's a little tip in case it's useful for you. Facebook ads, that worked great at the outset of my agency. I would say that its usefulness significantly dropped once we increased the size of the clients that we were dealing with. So when you're dealing with small clients and it's like, okay, it's $1,500 a month, it's $2,000 a month. So small ticket type of clients, you can get them from Facebook. It gets harder and harder. This was multiple years ago when we were doing that. So the ROI worked out on that, but it may or may not work today because the costs are significantly higher on Facebook, and the kinds of clients that you get are not closing like they used to. At least that's what agencies I'm working with. They're not seeing the close rates be as high as they used to be when I was doing it. So Facebook for the lower level clients, but don't think of it as a silver bullet. There are a lot of marketers and folks starting agencies which think of Facebook as this is the way I'm going to get clients. Maybe you could get clients, but again, as you grow your agency into a real business and you're looking for retainers of $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 a month, then you're not really going to be generating that much directly from Facebook in terms of lead gen style ads. You may want to do some branding, and I know some people are saying, branding, what's that? Why would I ever run money to branding ads? You may wish to do that. I'll get more into that later. But for Facebook, it's something to think about, but it's a little more for the smaller clients. The other thing is newsletter insertion ads, something that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Now, I'm old, so I come from an era when we had print newspapers. Imagine that. So we had print newspapers, and you could buy insertion orders in newspapers. So an insertion is just a little block that is on the newspaper, and what you can do is get a little ad at the top of the newspaper. Now, when everyone went digital, what a lot of agencies don't realize is that you can actually buy real estate in other people's newsletters. So for instance, again, I worked in the legal field, and there are 50 state bars, 50 states in the US, 50 state bar associations, and each one of those state bar associations has a newsletter, and you can buy an ad insertion in each one of those. So I bought out the banner at the top of several of them. So New York, California, where most of the lawyers were, I bought a banner at the very top of the monthly newsletter that went out, and I would get hundreds and hundreds of leads from that. So this is kind of thinking in a different way. You're thinking, where is my audience already going? If they are belonging to some kind of association, if they are registered professionals, they are already getting materials from somebody. Can you just pay to get in front of them that way? So this was one of the very first things that I did when launching my agency. And I probably, over the course of it, got several thousand leads just from doing these kinds of insertions. And they're not cheap, and you're paying up front, and you don't know if they're going to work, but that's kind of the cost of testing it. So consider whether or not insertions would be a good thing for you. I also did, as I mentioned, Facebook brand awareness ads. What we would do is retarget. So any site visitors, especially people who had downloaded any lead magnet, we'd stay in front of them. Low budget campaign just for brand awareness. And what did this do? Did this cause conversion to happen? I don't know, but I will tell you one thing with all of these activities that we were doing. I was told by multiple prospects as we were just about to close them, hearing that I see you guys everywhere is like gold, because as a marketing agency, you can then say, if I can do that for me, I can do that for you, right? That was the kill shot for the pitch right there. If they're seeing you everywhere, they know that you can do that for them. So these little brand ads, they are not direct conversions. They are an impression. They'll remember you from them, and it's going to be ammunition that's going to increase your close rate. So consider it. It's a low dollar spend, but it's about being everywhere. So now let's switch gears a little bit. So we've talked about organic. We've talked about paid media. Now we're going to talk about going outbound. So we had an outbound team of SDRs, sales development reps. They're called different things in different industries. My background was in software here in Silicon Valley, so they're called sales development reps, SDRs. Sometimes you hear them called BDRs, business development reps. In any case, these are folks who are queuing up sales for a sales rep, or for yourself if you're just starting out. So you can think of it as kind of a junior sales rep, and all they are doing is getting people onto appointments. So what they did for us was call any inbound lead within 24 hours of downloading any asset. So if they downloaded the lead magnet, if they made an inquiry, we wanted to make sure that the lead was called within 24 hours. Now, I will tell you that best practice is like 5 minutes. You really want to grab someone immediately at the point that they download something. So if it was during business hours, we'd do it typically within 10 minutes. If someone downloaded something, they would get a call. If it was after hours, it might be a little longer. So 24 hours was like the outside of we would ever want this to happen. But during the growth period of my agency, I had 2 and then eventually 4 SDRs who would be doing just this, contacting people who expressed any kind of interest. And the reason is the immediacy. You're going to pay to have these people on staff, but the urgency of that someone has in the moment saying they have a problem, the faster you can get them into an appointment, the higher the rate that you're going to actually be able to make use of that lead. Very often happens, and you probably see this if you have any kind of download, PDF download, any kind of offer, they download it, they get on your email list, and then most of the time nothing happens. And then maybe they're shaken out of their zombie state a year later if you've been nurturing them by email, but most of them, nothing happens. If you just follow up on the momentum they already have with going outbound with a phone call, not just an email, a phone call, that is something that can kick them into action. And for me, had a huge impact going from not having any of those reps and relying on the client to actually following up and getting them on an appointment. It was more than 2x the number that actually got onto appointments from a lead magnet by doing this. We also experimented with outbound emailing at scale. And I know that this is something that comes and goes in terms of popularity, but we tried it and it didn't work for us very well. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I know that there are some people who are very, very good at it. I will say, having tried outbound emails at scale at 3 companies, that if you are not going to commit to it and actually hire experts to do it, I don't think it is a DIY type of situation. We tried every method of doing this. We did it ourselves. We hired somebody to show us how to do it, and then we've had a third party just do it. And only in the third situation was it ever really successful for us, when we hired someone to do the entire thing. And then we did get some appointments, but in an agency context, unless you are an expert in this, it's really hard to maintain. And especially if you are smaller and you as the owner operator of the business are thinking that you are going to be setting all this stuff up, I would think twice. There are higher yield things to do. If on the other hand that you're larger and you're doing $5-10 million in sales and you have not gone out by email, that's absolutely something you should try. But don't think this is something that's set and forget. There is a lot of tweaking that is necessary. There's a lot of experimentation that's necessary. It is not a magic bullet. Just like I said at the beginning, if anyone's pitching you that this is the magic bullet, we'll just do cold emails for you, it's not. It takes a lot of work and you have to dial it in, but it can be productive. Outbound appointment setting by phone. We also did this. We could call, because we're calling businesses, the telemarketing rules don't really apply in the same way for consumers. So we can go outbound and do appointment setting by phone. So we did it for a year with mixed results. So we did get probably, I would say, 250,000, 400,000, somewhere in that zone of new ARR billings from that. But it was difficult to manage. So when you're managing an outbound calling team, you really, again, have to have somebody who's done it before. So I first did the mistake, which I'm telling you not to do, which is trying to manage it myself. And while I have managed sales teams, I have not managed a high volume outbound sales team. And that is a very different beast. So if you're going to do it, my recommendation would be hire somebody who's done it before, whether it's an outsourced agency of some sort, or whether it's a person who's done it before. You can be successful with this. At least you could be, 5-ish years ago when I was doing this. In terms of now, the landscape may have changed. I don't know how much people answer the phone anymore, but I know in some industries, it definitely does work. So it might depend on your vertical. So think about whether or not your vertical actually answers the phone. So again, in legal, where I was working, attorneys actually answer the phone, or their front desk does, and then it can be patched through to them. And so we just had to make sure that we had a good gatekeeper bypassing script for it. Other industries may or may not answer the phone. A lot of folks going for general contractors, for instance, those guys never answer their phone. So you're just not going to land a connect that way. And even if you do, they're on the job and they don't want to talk about this now. So that might not be the best thing. If you're going for a dentist office, maybe it's more like legal. If you're going for B2B software, do those guys even use their phone? I don't even know. So think about who your client is and think about whether or not that modality will work for that client. It can work. Again, I've seen it work for some agencies, but it is very situationally dependent. And on my basis, the transactional overhead of managing that team was not worth it. So we ended up discontinuing it. So that is the 3 main pillars that I used to generate over 10,000 leads for my agency. Hopefully there's something useful for you in there. And no matter what you do, always think back to who is my prospect and how much do I want to make from them? Because what you use and how many strategies that you deploy are going to be dependent on what the kind of agency you have. If you're really going for a lower end client at smaller dollars, $1,500, $2,000, $3,000 a month, then you're going to have to necessarily go broader with some of these things. cost. But you might find also that using any kind of paid media gets really expensive. If you are going higher end and you're saying $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 a month, you can go lower volume and be very successful with it, but you're not going to be using all of the platforms. So you're not going to be using probably Facebook paid to generate the lead. So just think about what your agency should be, what you want it to be, and then match the kind of lead generation you're doing to what you want it to be.